Okay, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Larissa Hersina, and I am the president of the Ukrainian Museum of Canada, Ontario branch. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of Credit. It is an honor to introduce Leonard Krawchuk, one of Canada's most distinguished collectors of Ukrainian folk art. Born in 1947 in Flin Flon, Manitoba, to Ukrainian immigrant parents, Leonard's passion for his heritage began early, sparked by his aunt and nurtured through Ukrainian dance. His enthusiasm caught the attention of local supporters who helped send him to St. Andrew's College in Winnipeg, where his lifelong love of Ukrainian culture truly flourished. Over the years, Leonard taught the Ukrainian dance across Manitoba, worked in healthcare, and devoted his life to preserving and sharing Ukrainian traditions. He traveled to Ukraine 3 times, each journey deepening his connection to the land of his ancestors and expanding his extraordinary collection of folk art, ceramics, textiles, and books. An artist himself, Leonard painted, wove kilims, and created beadwork, always guided by a deep respect for craftsmanship and heritage. Today, we celebrate not only his remarkable collection, but his enduring contribution to Ukrainian culture in Canada. The Ukrainian Museum of Canada, Ontario, is deeply grateful that Leonard entrusted us with his remarkable collection. This was made possible in large part through the efforts of Bill Struss, who encouraged Leonard to place his trust in the Ontario branch. In 2021, Bill personally drove the textile portion of the collection from Winnipeg to Toronto. In 2023, Bill and his wife Marion once again supported the museum by funding the specialized transport of the ceramics, porcelain, and visual art. We extend our heartfelt thanks to Bill and Marion for their vision, generosity, and invaluable assistance. I would now like to introduce you to Alexandra Shkandri, who will be moderating this afternoon's conversation. Alexandra is a PhD candidate in political science at the University of Toronto. Her research examines how art, conflict, and identity intersect, focusing on Ukraine. Professionally, Alexandra serves as a curator at the Oseredok Ukrainian Cultural and Educational Center and as a grants officer for the Shevchenko Foundation. Beyond academia and the arts, Alexandra has contributed to public education and community engagement as a researcher and translator, notably ensuring the Ukrainian-Canadian experience was represented at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg. So thank you for joining us today. If you have not yet experienced the Kosiv Bazaar exhibition, a living archive of the Carpathians, guest curated by Miroslava Boykiv, who is in the audience with us, we invite you to visit today. The museum's open, the boutique's open. We would like also to thank the sponsors of the Kosiv Bazaar exhibition. Sus Foundation of Canada, Shevchenko Foundation, Timurtay Foundation, Kalimin Foundation, Franco Family Foundation, Ukrainian Credit Union, and St. Volodymyr Institute. So let's begin our conversation with Leonard.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome. We are very lucky to have Len Krawchuk here. He is also a fellow Winnipegger, so I am extra excited to have the opportunity to talk to him a little bit. And I wanted to begin by talking a little bit about your Ukrainian heritage. So, there's a joke in Winnipeg that everyone is either Ukrainian or married to someone Ukrainian, but in Flin Flon, Manitoba, I'm not sure if that's true. Like, tell us a little bit about growing up up north in Manitoba.
Well, first, let me mention about your parents who are. Hello? Oh, good. This young lady, her parents are well known in Winnipeg and have been very active in the Ukrainian culture. So we're very lucky we have them. Her father's a writer and has done some wonderful research. Yes, I grew up in Flin Flon. By car from Winnipeg, it would take you 8 hours to go straight without stopping. So it's a long ways up. And there were two churches, the Ukrainian Catholic and the Orthodox. Now, I was raised in the Ukrainian Catholic Church. I and my two brothers were altar boys, but I was the only one who also sang in the choir. We also had a cook organization there. So the Orthodox, which I admire so much, they had a wonderful conductor, Mrs. Dobrohorsky. So she taught, both choirs got together and we put on concerts. We learned so much from this lady. The Ukrainian Catholic Church was designed by the Father Ruch, who was one of those non-Ukrainians. We needed priests. A lot of our priests in Ukraine were married, and they were forbidden to come to North America. Especially in the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholics said, priests don't get married. What's wrong with you? We don't want these people. So Bishop Budka and Metropolitan Shiptitsky got about 5 of them together who went to Lviv, got permission from the Pope to change their religion to Ukrainian Catholic, and they learned the language, the customs, and the liturgy. So they came to Canada and started the working amongst the missionaries. But the church in Flin Flon, there was nothing really Ukrainian in there. The icons were all Western, no iconostasis. Yes, the priests spoke in Ukrainian, very little English because the first 2 priests came from Ukraine. And I went to the Orthodox Church. You have a beautiful iconostasis done by a Winnipegger icon artist. And Father Truffin, some of you may know him. He was the priest at that time who later went to Dauphin and then went to St. Andrew's College where he taught. A wonderful man and family. And the other priest that came later was a young priest with a 3-year-old child and wife, and young priests. Ours were getting old already in the Catholic Church, and this was so impressive. But through them, I learned a great deal. Their concert, Las Ukrainka, Shevchenko, there was a lot more going on in our culture. So, but let quickly tell you about Manitoba and the Galician Horde. In 1919, there was a huge Winnipeg strike. It's in the history books. It was major. The same thing occurred in 1934 in Flin Flon. The people wanted security, unions, and there was a few communists that came from Winnipeg that organized this. They were sent back to Ukraine. It was very difficult to be Ukrainian. If you were Ukrainian, you were Russian. If you were Russian, you were communist. So we did not show our culture too much. Yes, we had our folk dancing, but we kept within our own selves. My mother had a beautiful peremska, that's a wraparound headdress. She kept it hidden. And she had 2 books in Ukrainian. Those were kept hidden. And I remember when I was very young, maybe 5 or younger, 2 police came to our house to speak to my mother. And I remember them distinctly because Flin Flon, no one dressed as well as these 2 policemen, and with wonderful, expensive suits. What went on there, I didn't find out till years later. And years later, Mr. William Perpeluch, a big stauncher, he had a grocery store in Flin Flon, And he supported and helped build the church, which still stands and is about to become a historical site. He sent me to St. Andrew's College, there in Winnipeg amongst our Ukrainians. The museums, Osaradok, Mrs. Mary Klemkiw, the wife of Volodymyr Klemkiw, she had a store and would always call me, Leonard, I got something new, you have to come and see it. Osaradok, she worked there. The Ukrainian Catholics had a wonderful museum, which now they put all the folk art away, and it's a religious museum. Now, I want to talk to you about a religious museum. The Catholics might have 2 or 3 of them. Nasha Pravoslavny Nemaya Odan Museum, Nasha religious icons, priest vestments, the altar embroidery. Achumumin Nemaya Moto. Our rural churches are closed. People are not there anymore. People are breaking in and stealing things, burning them. And that was a big thing. A church, a wooden church, it's sacred. The only way to dispose of it was to burn it. And I always complained, the Soviets are burning our churches. Why are we burning ours here? We need to empty those churches and bring them to a museum. You have to have a museum. You have to get after your metropolitan. And the museum here, this building is soon going to be torn down, and they're going to build a wonderful museum with museum lighting and humidity controls. So please support it. I mean, I know how expensive it is to live here in Toronto. Winnipeg is bad enough. But here, please support the museum in the next phase. This is a small collection. There's about to be 2 or 3 more of Poltava, a lot of pottery, kilims, more on Bukovina, more on Lviv. There's going to be a lot more of my collection. So you're going to be seeing a lot, but we need your support to do that. Thank you.
Leonard could work in the marketing department. We should hire him after this. But one of the things that we haven't touched on a little bit that you mentioned is your time in Ukrainian dance, because you were very involved in your community. Can you tell us a little bit about what brought you into that, and what brought you into, revisiting this Ukrainian that was such a tricky identity to have when you were younger?
Well, my 2 teachers were students of Vasil Avramanko, and one time I met him, he came up to Flin Flon, but in his old age, he was a tyrant. My 2 dance groups came to learn from him, but they were very childish dances, not like Virsky or Veryoka. And we were not too impressed with them. At the end, he was going to have a big concert, but I and the priest's son from the Orthodox Church, Father Trufan's son, we were the only ones left. Everyone just dropped out. They couldn't deal with this very angry man, which is a pity. Vasily Vermanko did so much for our culture. As you know, he's known the world over for his dance schools. But I came to Winnipeg. I learned a bit from the Wazelka dancers and the Dauphin dancers. They had a good dance group. And while they were performing, I would be busy writing down the steps they're doing and the formations and then teaching that. And the second year, the instructor had to leave. So Father Savchuk was one of the 3 major Orthodox missionary priests who was important for forming the church. He formed St. Andrew's College. What a wonderful place. If ever you're in Winnipeg, you have to go there. He called me, Leonard, would you please come here and teach? Well, at that time, I was working for the company. Now, I was telling you what the general impression of Ukrainians were. I had started working, and I went to the boss and said, I'm sorry, I've only been here for 2 weeks, but I'm going to leave. I'm going to Winnipeg, to St. Andrew's College, to teach Ukrainian dancing and learn more about our culture. I never got back. They wouldn't hire me again. That was the end of that. They were very angry with me. Our Ukrainians were really looked down upon. And I'm sure a lot of you remember we were called bohunks, and we had other names, Galician horde. My mother was always scared of me being in this direction of folk art and warning me. Occasionally I would go to the Soviets. We have a large labor temple, and they would bring artists from Ukraine. We had no contact with Soviet Ukraine, so they had some real good artists, and they would always bring something from Ukraine that you can buy, and they have quite a nice museum. But they're getting old, and I'm wondering what's going to happen to that museum. Now,
speaking of the Soviets, you made a few trips to Ukraine to begin your collecting, but you were going before the fall of the Soviet Union. Can you tell us a little bit about what was that like to go during this time? What were your experiences there, and how did that impact the collecting?
well, the family came to Canada in 1902 and 1904, so we had no more two major wars. We didn't correspond with them, although my great-grandmother said, one person wrote her and said, would you send me such a skirt, such a color, such a material? And she said, I don't even carry something like that. So that was the end of writing to those people in Ukraine. The first trip was in the early 70s, and as I was standing there in Kiev, everyone has family in Ukraine. I'm standing there looking, they're hugging them and kissing them and giving them flowers. And my friend Stefa Kordopol looked at me, and this poor guy all by himself sort of adopted me. She was one of maybe 5, 6 women who went throughout Ukraine looking for things for me. And in those days, shawls and kerchiefs were very sought after in Soviet Ukraine. So I would mail those, they would sell them, make some money, and then they would buy something for me and send it to me. Later, when I was buying something over $100, I would send the money through Meast, and they would take it directly to the home, give it to the person, and then they would take that object, mail it to Toronto, and then I would have to pay for the postage from Ukraine and then Toronto to Winnipeg. But that was the only safe way of getting money, and so people wouldn't really know the contacts in Ukraine are busy with us Canadians. So that was one of the many ways of obtaining some of these things.
Did you have freedom to travel around in Ukraine? What was that experience like?
Yeah, yes and no. In Kyiv, on a hot day, I went to Vysoky Zamok, the ruins of a castle in the city of Lviv. The man who was following me, and it was very evident, one good thing, you can't get lost in Soviet Ukraine, you're always being followed. Well, he knew how hot it was and to go up there, so he waited down below for me, and then I went up and took pictures, and he came down, and there he was waiting for me and followed me back to the hotel. But the second year, when I was in Chernivtsi, I went to Tovarystvo Ukraina. Panchorny was there, the communist head of the tourist bureau. And I asked, here I am in Chernivtsi, Kosev is so close, can I please go to Kosev to see these artists and the artwork? And I'll pay for the cab, I'll pay the translator and the person to drive. Niet, and that was the end of that. The second trip, okay, I'm gonna play your game. I would, in my moje bidne Ukraine, moje mova jak Pilka I Meka. My Ukrainian is very home-orientated and very basic, although I have grade 8 Ukrainian. Every town I went into, I would write, they would say, come and write something about this visit you have here and what you think of it. And I was like, okay, Радянська Україна, так гарно край, museum, церкви є, люди так добре. And they loved that. Here was a Ukrainian Canadian who spoke a little bit Ukrainian and praising them. Well, Chernivtsi, I went back to Panchorny, a great name, because він був чорний так як ім'я. Okay, he allowed me to go to Kosev, but wouldn't allow me to go to the Yamarok. And we went to one church built in the late 1800s, and there was a museum in there run by Russians. They wouldn't allow me to take pictures, and they were not too happy with me. But when I went outside, I went to one lady who was standing there. Ти можеш знати, які що робить кераміки? And they said, yes, моя сусідка, and that was Stefania Voloschuk. She was not too popular with the Soviets. Perhaps her family had connections with UPA, the insurgent army, or maybe she said something that they didn't like. So, a lot of students came to her house, and she had the kilim to fire the pottery and the potter's wheel, and she taught a lot. But she was just that day released from hospital. The pottery from the Hutsuls, they have a glaze which is laden with lead. It's very important you do not eat from Hutsul pottery. Hopefully that's been changed now. But she said to me, and her father was a major potter, come with me to the attic. And she showed me all her collection, and so I took. But leaving, that KGB who was head of our group and following us elsewhere, he was drinking every night and sleeping during the day. He took my suitcases, and I had several of them. He laid them flat, and everyone else's suitcases on top. And there was my pottery. So a lot of Stefania Voloschuk pottery was broken, but I had it restored, and there's much of it is here in the exhibit. But there I was. The Canadian government warned us in those days, you're of Ukrainian heritage, don't do anything foolish, be careful, because if you get in trouble, we can't help you. You're Ukrainian, and they're going to claim you're one of theirs. So what was I going to do? I'd love to have gone to the Canadian embassy and complain, but I knew not. I better not do that. So when we were in Kiev going through customs, I'll pick up the suitcase, and you would hear this shattering of all this pottery, and laid it down, and they knew about me and said, oh, you can go. And one lady said, why are you letting him get away with all these treasures of Ukraine? You should be charging him. But that man at least let me through. And then when I came to Canada, standing in line, I was still watching the people going through customs, and they give you a piece of paper. And I noticed my paper had a check mark on it, so I turned it the other way and passed it in, and they let me right through. So I thankfully was able to go through customs. But that man, I remember to this day, he gave us a real hard time in Soviet Ukraine.
You had the chance to visit so many other artisans, and in particular, you have a love for kilome and textile arts. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those people that you got to meet while you were in Ukraine?
Yes, the big potter that I met, his name was Vasil Shvets, and his wonderful wife, who is more noted than him for pottery, was Alexandria Shvets, and she was the woman with the head. So I would send photographs saying I would like this made in this form, and Vasil would say to me, but to nie ukrainsky. There was a ram with a vase on his back. You can see that in the museum. To nie nashi. So I sent postcards from the Ukraine Museum of New York, and such a piece of pottery was made by the ancient old master, so he made that for me. He made a beautiful svichnik for me for 5 candles, a tonia nashi. So I showed him one postcard done by Krawchuk, and then he made it. The school, the college in Kosiv, they had one little book on carving, and they let the students look at that. I had 2 copies of that book. There was very few printed. Those copies are now in the library with my vast library. So they learned from the masters or those who would teach them, but the Soviets did not encourage it. They knew they can make money by selling that stuff, so that part they did, but the pottery, they never allowed blue and yellow, the colors of our Ukrainian flag. That was not allowed in the Soviet times. There are some pieces there, some very old ones, that you can see those colors.
And you have a deep knowledge base and a deep love for both the processes and the history. Can you tell us a little bit about, because you also are an artist in your own right, can you tell us a little bit about studying and learning how to weave?
Yes, in Winnipeg, I had a small table loom, and I took 3 courses, but one course was with Carol Romanek from Winnipeg. Carol was from the same town of Pine River where my mother was from, so we had a lot in common. Carol is the master weaver of the Ukraine Canadians. We have quite a few weavers. Alas, a lot of them are gone now, but no one had the knowledge she had. And right now, for her albums, she would write how to tie up your loom, how many petals you had to use, the colors according to DMC tradition. So she made sure the colors matched the authentic weavings that you were doing. Those 4 volumes right now from Winnipeg are in Saskatoon, and they're looking forward to publishing. Even Ukraine today has not put out such knowledgeable books. Yes, we had a Mrs. Yandra who put out a book in English, but was very basic. I met her. I spent 2 summers in Banff School of Fine Art. The Ukrainian Women's Association sponsored these courses, and Banff, what a wonderful place to be. Unfortunately, Carol at that time wasn't teaching. It was Pat Pellich, a wonderful lady, a lady who had a chemistry knowledge and major degrees, but the man, the men gave her a hard time. So she changed her profession, took up weaving, and she taught. She learned a lot from Carol, and alas, that was the way in those days in the 60s how women were treated. She died not too long ago at a very young age. It was sad. But there I met other weavers, Helen Holanati from Edmonton. That's a major weaver. Next to Carol, Elizabeth did a lot for clothing, plakta and poyasea. And let me quickly tell you about weaving. We're trying to recreate the poyasea, but that is just about an impossible thing to do today because there's 2 ways to do poyasea. One of them, if you're very advanced, you have a card system and you do your threading through these cards, but those people have to be well trained to it. So the old-fashioned way was you pick up certain warp, that was your basic foundation, and by a certain pattern, you pick those up, weave, pick up a bit more, weave it, and to do maybe an inch would take you over an hour. So to do a whole poyas, it took a long time. But the interesting thing about the wool, the spinners in Ukraine, as they would be spinning, they would take the hair of the horse tail and they would mix it in with the wool. And that would make it a lot stronger. So when you're picking it up, it wouldn't break on you as easily. Now, how many people spin today and know how to weave, how to spin the horse hair, horse tail in? Very few. And the linen was the same thing. As you were making the threads, you were using spit and twirling it and making it quite strong. So when you were doing the embroidery, it stood up a lot better than if you used modern embroidery thread and modern linen. You didn't get the same effect, especially, for instance, the Borstiv sorochka, where the embroidery threads stand up quite high, and those were done in wool. So linen and Poya said that was a real problem to recreate some of these. But there are still some people doing it. When I was in Chinitsi, there was one lady with a poyas, and I said, "Oi, что-то я достала, я, может, достать." So she took me, and my friends took me to her village of Malaha, and there, in her house, there were 3 rows of kilims hanging from the ceiling, one after another, hanging. I mean, you have to go up and go in between so you can see them. But that was the tradition, and a beautiful woven willow fence. We lost that art on how to do that. Well, she would do some weaving for me and do some beautiful Bukovinian obhorta, the wraparound skirt and poyasa, and I would send her the shawls and the kerchiefs, and once she wanted the shuba, but the artificial shuba, so I sent that. So these were how I met some of the artists. Shvets, which I talked about, the potter, him and Alexandria, major potters in Kosev, they took me all over to the Hutzel Artel, and there all the artists would come in, especially in the winter, and weave and do the pottery and fire their pottery and make headdresses. So I took a whole bunch of pictures of that. Unfortunately, they didn't have time to show the step-by-step photographs with major potters and doing the pottery, dipping it in clay for the cream color. Here in Toronto, you had people who did traditional Ukrainian pottery, but with a modern Canadian flair, and they used the bright white. Some of this for sale in the boutique. It's good to collect that because no one's doing that anymore. And that was a Ukraine-Canadian adaptation of our Hutsul pottery. It's very important to save and collect that. The piets, they had two of them. It was a good-sized room. And when I went the first day, all the pottery was still there. It had already cooled, and they were about to take it out. The next day when our tour came and joined us, that was emptied already. And but to meet those potters, so Vasil showed me him working on the wheel, creating a pot, and just in seconds, his hands would form that big vase. Then another lady would dip it in the cream clay and pull that out and etch the design in while the clay was still damp. And then it would be colored with brown and green and yellow, and then put in after it dried completely, it had to dry out completely, then they would fire it. I have sent pictures, and hopefully one day these will be enlarged. You can see step by step with these master potters doing and making this, and that big kiln. Stefania Velishchuk, because she couldn't go to the Artel, she had her own piets to fire her kiln, and I have a picture of her standing beside it, and pots where the dyes were in.
You also have an incredible collection of metalwork and of wood carvings. Can you tell us a little bit about what got you interested in that and some of your experiences meeting artisans who are specialists in these techniques?
Well, of course, this goes back when I was teaching Ukrainian folk dance. I mean, I wanted to know the music, and I wanted to know what was the clothing like from the Hutsul, the Lemko, the Poltavsky. So that's where I got started, and I'm looking at it. Olesha Tarach, my late great friend from Winnipeg, a lot of you know her. She went across Canada giving talks, and on my last trip, she headed a trip to Ukraine in 1997. So my friend Vasil Shvets would introduce me to some of the Kosev, the Hutsul potters and weavers. I commissioned quite a few kilns. Some of them are on display here. There's a huge kiln from Houghton. Interesting, in Winnipeg, we have a lady, Mrs. Skripnik, Ostap Skripnik's wife, worked in that weaving factory, and she once restored, I had a wraparound skirt hand woven with a hole in it, and she filled that hole in. I mean, no one knows how to do it, and she knows how to wash the ancient, antique sorochka, because if you put them in water, they're vegetable dye, and they will run. Well, she would take them outside in the winter and swish it around in the snow, and then hang it up and take it again and swish it around the snow, and it would sort of be cleaned and freeze dry so it wouldn't run. That lady, I mean, we have very few of them have that knowledge and how to do that today. And so many of our sorochka were ruined because they put them in the washing machine or hand washed and the colors ran. A wood carver, I went to his home. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting some of these names. I sent him pictures. There's a beautiful candelabra there and a hand cross. They're dated from the 1890s. He made copies of that for me. And at the front, there's a wooden canteen with his name on it that he had carved. Amazing carver. And unfortunately, he's still alive, but he has severe back pain, and so he doesn't do any more carving. Weavers, I commissioned weavers to do some designs. There was one lady in the Kosev area. She worked in a hotel, and there was a pre-Soviet kiln that I was very fond of. There's a singer in Ukraine, Boris Khmurya, who sang Zaporozhye Zadanaim. The bass baritone, to this day, we don't have anyone, even outside of Ukraine, that had such a magnificent voice as Boris Khmurya. And when he would sing Zaporozhye, they made a film, you could see him, and there was shivers going down my back when he was singing Yabiya Banduru, such a wonderful singer. Anyway, there was a picture in a Soviet magazine of him, and on the floor was this kilim. And Osadak had a bigger picture of it, so I made a photocopy of that and sent it to Kosiv. The family there were making kots. These are the mohair-like blankets, nalizhniki. Those were also made in Poltava. I've only seen one photograph of an antique one because no one does those anymore. The wool for that is about that round, maybe the size of a toonie. So they would weave that. In the old days, they would put it on a water mill, and as it went around into this cold water, they would take a branch and hit it, and they would be combing it as it went around and around, and then flowing in this swift water. But how many water mills are there now that did this, that also ground the grain? So now they comb it with a special comb and to get that comb-like mohair effect. So anyway, that lady introduced me to this lady in Kosiv who made a copy of this beautiful kilim, which is called the cradle. The sides of the cradle are in the kilim motif. But as she was making it, the director of the Hutzal Artel said, "Hey, this is wonderful. We have to start making it." And she said, "No way." The threads kept breaking on her because there was so much work involved in changing your colors, and this is the last one I'm ever going to make. And unfortunately, that was it. So another prized weaver didn't continue with the art. The metalwork, it's called German silver. Sorry, I'm forgetting the name in Ukrainian. It starts with an M. I met him, and he was actually an engineer. But a lot of his work is there, the beautiful bag, the belt, the beautiful crosses of necklaces, the woman's khalif cane that she used, and the man's canes, which were axes, but they used these as canes. So he made all these for me, and he had went to the old masters who had died, and the tools were still there, and he worked on this. There's a book of his work I donated. By the way, I donated my vast collection because since the 60s I would be collecting books. Ukrainian bookstore in Edmonton, fantastic bookstore. I would go to University of Manitoba, and there was Orasha Trach, who worked there, and she would tell me, you can get this book there. And when she went to Ukraine on many times, she'd always send me books. And I had a lady in Kiev who would go directly to the printer, and the printers, of course, were paid money, but they also were paid the books in exchange, so they would sell them cheap. So she would send me all these. And to pay her, she knew the director of the embassy in Washington, D.C. She was good friends of him, so I would send the money to America, and he would forward the money to her there in Kiev. So no one knew about this. It was very done secretly through the embassy. So I had 9 huge bookcases and 12 boxes of books that Mr. William, you mentioned him and Marianne Strus, sent all that. The first shipment, he organized a student to come in to photograph, catalog it, and enter it on the computer. And then he took everything and put it in storage, and it was there for several months. And then he came with a truck and moved it all the way to Toronto. He drove that truck, this big truck full. That was the first shipment. The second shipment, he hired 4 people to pack, especially some more of the kilims, some more costumes, and a lot of the paintings and the ceramics. 3.5 days they worked 8 hours packing that collection, which you see now. It cost over $15,000 to pay those people and to ship it here. Now, who can afford something like that? Bill Schwetz, Bill Strus, and Marianne are responsible for that. So you're seeing this wonderful exhibit courtesy of them. They were the sponsors of this. Bill called me frequently and chatted with me whenever he was in Winnipeg. They both would come, and I'll pull out something new to show him. By the way, my mother, when she would come, I would have to, що я мав, що не ви, що я не можу покласти, бо вона була злосна на мене. І що ти купив на то? $5. Так багато? Що ти є дурний? And of course I paid maybe $150 for something, but that was the mentality. She was lucky. Because she was from a big family in Pine River, she was sent to help her grandmother from Husiatan Rayon in Tanopo, and she would help with the milking the cows and whatever. And she didn't go to school until she was 9 years old. The superintendent found out where she was and sent her back to Pine River to go to school. But alas, she didn't talk much about her great-grandmother until near the final years of her life. And she would love to play in the huge skarena that great-grandmother had, and there was all those Krawchuk and costumes. They said when grandmother came, you would hear her coming because she would wear her coral necklace with the dukash heading, and you would hear her coming before you would see her. She had a picture of her father in the Austro-Hungarian uniform, and up above was Franz Joseph, the Prime Minister of Austro-Hungary, and the son. Very few people have such a photograph. It took me 30 years to find out where did that photograph go, and now I have that hanging in my home. I should make a copy of it and send it to the museum because there's very few photographs of that. True, it's only his head. The rest was put over a soldier. But to be in the Austro-Hungarian army, you had to serve about 20 years. So how he got out of it and how much he served, I don't know. If you went back to Ukraine, they would grab you and push you back in the army. But that is a real treasure, that photograph I have of him. But as I said, my mother, she loved these things. She did embroidery, but nothing Ukrainian. She spoke to us only in Ukrainian. 3 brothers, so I mean 3 boys, and no one would apparently hear what she said, but by the tone of her voice, they knew we were getting heck from her. Dad spoke wonderful Ukrainian, but never to us. He wanted to be Canadian. He had a hard life. He rode the rails in 1933 to the Pas from Ethelbert Dauphin area, and then walked all the way from the Pas to Flin Flon on the railways because the train wasn't going there. That was just for hauling the ore, and it still wasn't working. And then to support himself until he was hired, he cut wood for the people to buy. So he had a very difficult life. He got pneumonia in the period, so he had to stay and pay for room and board. But as soon as he made some money, he called my mother from Pine River. They got married and came, and he had a house already waiting for them. So, and both of them being from the farm, we had beautiful gardens. Flin Flon, not many people have gardens because it's mainly clay, so he had to bring in soil from the Pas. The Pas, just an hour and a half south of Flin Flon, is a major wheat growing country, and chickens and cattle. So he would bring that in, and every now manure to fertilize, and we would go fishing, and he would take the catfish and dig it into the earth for fertilizer. Flin Flon had this huge mine. Smelter smoke was terrible. It burnt your eyes, your throat. In June, the leaves were all brown like autumn from the smelter smoke. So every weekend we would go out into Saskatchewan to go fishing away from that. So life in Flin Flon was very difficult. And today they're warning people, do not have any gardens because there's a lot of arsenic in it. But we were raised on that, and fortunately we managed to live okay.
Listening to you talk about all of the artisans who have taught you so much, and about all of the, the folks in Winnipeg, the conservators, the people who who have these incredible skills, the KGB agents who made sure you didn't get lost, all of these folks. I am curious, though, how did you learn about all of this? Like, how did you find this information? What drove you to, where did you research all of these ideas?
Well, in 1966, when I came to Winnipeg, a lot of the teachers were from Ukrainsky Holos, and those were the real masters who knew about these things. The teachers were wonderful. One of them was a superintendent of schools. He had went to Brandon to learn teaching. At that time, a lot of Ukrainians went there to learn how to teach, all the intricacies in it. And they were used to start teaching in Ukrainian and start teaching English. And he later became a superintendent. His name was Krawchuk. I asked him if he was a relative of mine, but no. He told me one story about his parents. They, for the first year, had a budai, the hut that's half underground, and on top there's a little roof, and that's how they lived the first year. Well, in the spring, the snow would be melting and it would be leaking through, so his mother took her shawl and wrapped it around the top of the bed, and it would collect the water so it wouldn't fall upon the children. But it had so much water, all of a sudden it fell, and everyone was wet, including the children and the bedding. I mean, the pioneer days were extremely hard. The men went and worked on the railway. It was our Ukrainian men who worked on the western prairies. The women stayed behind to raise the children, plant the garden, clean the trees, chop the trees, while the men went to make money to buy that cow, that pig, that chicken. I mean, you needed the cash. Not many of them had money, let alone they had foreign currency, which was useless. So it was our strong Ukrainian women who are really responsible for this. And look at them. Who makes the pierogies that kept the churches going? I have to tell you about one of our major icon artists, Vera Semchuk, well known. She's done many churches, a wonderful artist in Winnipeg. She went to one Orthodox church because she was going to paint behind the iconostasis. But the priest said to her, "Are you going to direct your husband to go and do the painting and you're going to stand on this side of the iconostasis?" Жінки не міг на той час бути на другий бік iconostasis by the altar. That was an old Ukrainian tradition. And she said, "No way, I'm going to be going there and I'm going to be doing the painting, climbing up the scaffold and doing the painting." Well, he finally gave in because he had no choice. Some of the old traditions are great and fine, but some of the old beliefs, are, well, to be left behind. We are Ukrainian Canadians. Our culture is different from that of Ukraine. Our dancing, our embroidery, our pottery, our beadwork. We bring an international flair, although the roots are the same, but we have something special to it. Our pesanka are like a fine mosaic of many, many designs. Right away, to nie vid Ukraina, to je nasze kanadzkie. But it's our women we are grateful for.
And so I will ask one last question before we move on to the slideshow and to questions from the audience. But do you have a favorite piece or a first piece? Like, what was the thing that got you into collecting? If you can think of one that stands out to you.
Well, the first piece, I always wanted a real Ukrainian sorochka, because here I was teaching dancing, and all I had was a white shirt with ribbons sewn down on the neck. Nothing really Ukrainian. But one lady came and saw my paintings, and one painting was of Tarasevchenko with a bandura on his lap. And she said, "Proszę, daj mi to, and I'm going to send you a sorochka." Well, she sent me a sorochka from Borshtiv. That family was from Tsahana Selo, which I did make it to. And so she sent it to me. But it was the old-fashioned style. The sorochka came down below your knees. It was like a skirt. I mean, you can't wear that for dancing. No embroidery in the front. The collar. Now, the collar was really interesting because it was embroidered in red embroidery thread. But when the men served in the Austro-Hungarian army, they had these little medallions signifying motifs of the Austro-Hungarian, and it was gold thread. So the women would take that, take out the gold thread and embroider with it on the shirt. So on the collar is that gold thread that the women, because in the villages, how can you get gold thread? And there's a special art in embroidering with it, because it would crack on you if you don't do it the correct way. But I could never wear that. So it was years later I came to Winnipeg, and at the Ukraińska Kneha, the stores there, they had from 1967, big expo was in Montreal, and they had sent to all the Ukraine Kneha stores across Canada all these wonderful things, so I was able to buy a few things for them.
This museum that we are here at today has done a wonderful job of preserving all of these wonderful artifacts, and we are so grateful to you for entrusting UMC Ontario here with your collection. So with that, please.
Thank you.